Hi, everybody. How's it going? My name is Meme Garcia. I go by they, them, theirs. I am an actor, I am a poet, and I am the playwright for House of Sueños. And today I'm interviewing Marlene Kenney, who is my godmother. That's just a little fact that I feel like that you all should know. But Marlene is a licensed clinical social worker and trauma therapist, as well as a first descendant of the Blackfeet tribe. And so welcome, Marlene.
I'm so happy to be here, Meme. Thank you for having me.
Yay. Yeah, so I asked that we have some kind of recorded interview like this because there's a lot of experiences of mental health challenges, trauma, intergenerational trauma in my story, both in my life and in the play. And I just wanted to talk to somebody just to kind of get to I don't know, essentially provide a study guide, not a study guide, but resources and ideas and thoughts behind how we can keep ourselves safe, what some of these terms are, and what happened to these characters. So that's kind of why I brought you in today. And I guess my first question is just what are some of the terms that, when I say intergenerational trauma or suicide ideation or can you help me define some of these terms for some of the people tuning in?
Yeah, it's a good place to start, and an interesting connection to Shakespeare, right? Because there's all kinds of intergenerational trauma, mental health conditions that we don't always fully explore in these characters. So we're never really far away in this conversation from these classical texts
Mhm.
too. We're just kind of shedding a new light on how these terms make sense for us as viewers, particularly those of us who might be carrying our own traumatic experiences. And that could be intergenerational trauma, meaning um, traumatic experiences that happen through families. And that might be legacies of colonization, reservation communities, indigenous populations, for example, that are have moved off the reservation and into communities and cities. Families are still carrying the experiences of our ancestors, right? And so intergenerational trauma might occur between people, but it's also sort of this legacy burden that we carry, maybe without even talking about it.
Mhm, mhm,
It sometimes feels like a secret, and sometimes it's a story or a narrative that just has a lot of pain.
mhm.
Something's happened,
Yeah.
right?
And
That's one of the key pieces. Something's happened, not
mhm,
something's wrong with folks who identify as having generational or family
mhm.
trauma.
And that sometimes I feel like one of the things I learned about intergenerational trauma is how it manifests in the body, that
Hmm.
there's like a physical footprint left behind of it.
It's true, because trauma really is about toxic stress and our human physiological response and reaction. And culture mediates that, but we are all humans with a human physiology.
Mhm,
And so at the end of the day,
mhm,
um, the way our body carries the story, it is what connects us with people who don't share our heritage or our culture.
mhm,
And in fact, really thinking about kind of weaving in how can people sort of stay safe as they're listening to this, and possibly their own histories of trauma or mental health challenges are activated by House of Sueños and what happens to the characters in each episode. We can really start to track and know what our tell is. How do
mhm,
I know I'm getting activated? Look to the body. It's
mm,
often racing heart, sweaty hands, kind of a desire to get up and move, or feeling really frozen. Or
mhm.
maybe this is affecting your sleep. So these physiological reactions are sometimes a tip off that we can get busy and start caring for our bodies
Mhm.
right kind of in the moment.
Yeah. And so, what is, if a tell like that is, I know for me, it really manifests itself in lack of sleep. That's when I know that I am feeling particularly, I think
Mhm.
either triggered in a way or just really incredible. I have really intense anxiety, so that I know that those things are often triggered, and I can look to my sleep patterns. But how can someone, if they tell that a tell is happening like this, how do they keep themselves safe, or how do they check in with that experience?
Yeah. Well, first of all, having a plan for yourself um, all the time, anyways, regardless of whether or not you're listening to House or Sueños, but in general, having a plan for yourself um, to start to manage those reactions to start
Mhm,
with.
mhm,
Knowing who is helpful to talk to
mhm,
call, to text, to reach out to in your life, and then if those folks aren't available, make sure you have their numbers near
mhm,
you in your phone or written someplace where you can find it.
mhm,
And if they're not available, um, having some resources of
mhm.
who you can reach out to.
Yeah.
So just having what we call a safety plan for yourself,
Mhm,
knowing what those tells are. Sometimes the tells are more like prominent thoughts of like, oh, I've tried everything to deal with this. Nothing helps. That's a prominent thought.
mhm,
And
mhm.
that's a narrative we seek to shift,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So sometimes it is in the thoughts that we have, or maybe feeling angry or irritable or grumpy with people. That's my particular go-to, as
Mhm.
I get kind of salty. You've seen that, I'm sure, Meme. Sorry. But that's usually a tell for me that something is activating, and it might
Mhm.
be that I have a high stress level, or it might be an event or something I'm exposed to.
Yeah. And so why are I remember when I sent you I sent you the script because I was just like, you know, I sent you the script because I was like, my family's gonna eventually have to experience this, and I need to know, like, do they need to be prepped for it? Which you were great, and you were like, yes, you should send them the script because they're all in it. No offense, family. But one of the questions that one of the things we talked about too is why stories like this are important. And I asked you that question, like, why is a story like House of Sueños important to you?
Uh, well, as a mental licensed mental health person and as a trauma responder, often I get called into schools and organizations and communities after something happens. And the one common thing that people say is that they wish they had a better way of talking about what was going on with somebody who maybe ended their life or something happened. And so one of the main takeaways from this experience of reading and now listening to House of Sueños is when we can make these stories explicit and have open conversations, we're
Mhm,
valuing the experience of people who have mental health conditions, and we're starting to reshape a narrative. It's like a narrative within a narrative within a narrative, right? We're reshaping a narrative that really allows us to say, these are the stories that shape the stories we live.
mhm,
And the characters have valuable life experiences
mhm,
alongside, because of,
mhm,
connected to everything they've been through.
mhm, mhm,
And so I think it's really important in the larger goal of destigmatizing mental health conditions and issues to be able to talk about them.
yeah.
That's one. Two, I think it's astonishingly beautiful to do this in Spanish,
Mhm,
and to write characters whose um, gender, sexuality, identity, all of the ways that we make meaning of our lives are landed in this story. And I think it's incredibly important for all of us who don't see ourselves squarely in the dominant narrative to be able to find meaning
Mhm.
in these characters and find solutions
Yeah.
to what's happened,
Yeah.
right? I think, and that's the third thing that I will say is that if you stay with House of Sueños, what you're treated to is how characters transform,
Mhm.
they transform factors of their own life story into a new story.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's what we're looking for in mental health.
Mhm.
We want a reshaping of the narrative. And it's not pretty. I
No.
mean, I don't think it's a spoiler alert to say, I don't think you're going to fall in love with Rena, but you're going to fall in love with how Rena inhabits her own being.
Yeah. Mhm.
And that is profound to me.
Well, I think looking at plays, I've always looked at plays uh as little windows where I can understand different parts of who I am, regardless of what the play is about, or and I have always seen Hamlet as a play that is so inexplicably about me, which is not how the rest of the world sees that play or how they have seen it. But I've always seen that. I'm like, gosh, I really resonate with this dead prince, this dead prince. And I think one of my things that I'm excited about House of Sueños is that you take this classic, quote unquote classic story, right? Because white supremacy has told us this is a classic story, and you're like, how I'm not pulling myself up to that story. Rather, I'm forcibly dragging that play to meet my life. And that I can use these words to kind of talk about things that I've had to sit with most of my life, which is, I think about the speech to be or not to be, which has just kind of haunted me most of my life. And so what are your thoughts on like using Shakespeare like this, on contextualizing Hamlet like this? Because people also think of Hamlet as a problem play, and I have to, I would agree with them in terms of like how Hamlet treats women. There's a lot of misogyny, but there's also a lot of mental health challenges in that play as well, and trauma. So yeah.
So I think we want to ask some different questions. We want to make sure that we're not romanticizing the experience of struggling with mental health issues, um, but to sort of look them sort of squarely as the way people make meaning of, and maybe without treatment, maybe without help. So where's the hope in maybe a different set of questions? Maybe we can say the real tragedy here is that the characters didn't know where to turn
Mhm.
to get support and help. Maybe um, we can sort of start to imagine what else could they have done, which is what I think um, is one of the imagined questions that I sort of came up with in listening and reading House of Sueños. We are looking at what else could Shakespeare's characters have done in this text, and think that that's a way to I think that's a way to do that forcible dragging, that
Mhm.
that recontextualizing.
Mhm.
It doesn't make Shakespeare less important. In fact, it sort of makes that way of telling a story more accessible and um, more classical in a certain way. No disrespect,
No, none at all here.
no disrespect, but we have to retell these stories um, based on what we know and who we know inhabits these universes of meaning.
Mhm.
Um,
Mm.
I think that that when we can talk about struggle and transformation, no matter what the text is,
Mhm.
we start to reimagine hope in and start to see ourselves more in the narrative and less in the story.
I like that, more in the narrative and less in the story. And another question I have, I just have lots of, I know that maybe you have questions for me, but how is it that, I'm assuming lots of theaters will kind of be gearing up to eventually come back. And I'm just wondering, like, how can theaters take care after this incredibly traumatic event, which has been the pandemic, which has been 2020, and essentially the trauma that has led up to 2020, right? Doesn't exist. 2020 didn't exist in a vacuum. How can theaters kind of hold space and make space for people to actively process trauma and grief coming back in whenever we come back?
Well, I think really not backing away from these from these important conversations. I
Hmm.
know that I have done a few of these sort of types of panels in theaters around Boston when different shows have come through town. Folks will ask me to sit on a panel before the show and offer tickets and incentives for people to be able to sit and have these conversations, especially educators
Hmm.
who then go back into their communities and have some language.
Hmm.
I think that always offering resources and interesting, useful resources to people, not just who to call when you're having um, a crisis, but one of my favorite websites is Now Matters Now,
Hmm.
um, which is a place to go to get some ideas of how to manage your reactions, manage your suicidal ideation, which is suicidal ideation are the thoughts of that people can have when they feel hopeless, when they experience intense psychological pain, and they're not sure what to do with it.
Hmm.
Um, so I think always having resources, drawing attention to resources, making sure that the language that we use to talk about suicide and mental health conditions isn't re-traumatizing or re-stigmatizing. I don't think that's the word.
Restigmatizing.
Yeah, that's actually the word. Yeah,
Got it.
thanks.
Got it.
So for example, we don't love the idea of committing suicide or a successful suicide. It makes it sound like a crime or a successful suicide. I mean, what's not success? What is successful about not getting the help that you need?
Hmm.
Always trying to reinforce this message that help helps, and look for it in House of Sueños. I think you're going to find it there.
Hmm. Hmm.
That there's a message, and it might come in different manifests in different ways. It might be a relationship you have with your godchild
Hmm.
who is hope enduring, right? It might be a therapist, it might be a faith leader or a healer of some sort. It might be massage or acupuncture. Who knows? There are multiple pathways of getting help,
Hmm.
and I think that theaters can um, make that. Uh, I mean, not to make that the show all about that, but
Hmm.
to make sure there's a mental health conversation and a pathway to to getting help.
Hmm.
One of my um, uh, great teachers has been somebody named Richard Schwartz, and he says we want to be hope merchants.
Hmm.
We always want to be in the position of trying um, to really sling hope. And can theaters do that?
Yeah.
And I say yes, it's possible to hold great tragedy and hope,
At the
one
same
in
time.
each hand.
Mm, I love that. I think that's beautiful. Um, well, do you have any questions for me? I mean, I don't know I'm like, I mean, I could continue talking about this for forever.
I want to know, this is a big one.
Hmm.
I want to know what it's like to try and give voice to your own family's intergenerational um, trauma, and to your own experience, now that it has absolutely been given voice to, um, not just writing about it, but these voices of the actors that are playing your characters. What is it like sitting on the other side of that?
I mean, I that's a great question. I think there's a lot of fear. I mean, so much of this play, it was very difficult to write. And I look back at what I was like while I was writing it. And it did feel like I was, carving out a large portion of myself to put on the page. And I think it definitely is good hearing from people that like they see themselves, right? So that it's kind of moved out past, obviously it's me, right? I mean, my tia is named Rina, my dad is named Luis, I have a mom and an awesome stepdad and a sister, and but it's cool to see how my incredibly personal story of trauma and pain and also healing relates to other people who don't necessarily come from my same background. And I think what also has been kind of beautiful is my Salvadoran family's response to the play. Now, most of my family can only understand, I would say, a third of the play, because the older generation of my family doesn't speak as much English as the younger generation does. But I think that there's this huge pain that comes from being a part of the Salvadoran diaspora, where because of the war or because of situations in the home country, in La Patria, we've come to the United States, and how this generation, my generation, feels that what you said, legacy burden of what our parents went through in order to make sure that like we could come and that we could thrive here, right? I think that that's something that's really I think affecting my primos the most. And my cousin Rocio, I know that she definitely wants to like help me translate it so that our you know elders can understand and be a part of that story. Because I don't think that's something that my like the family that is in El Salvador, I don't, I look at someone like my dad and I'm like, I'm not necessarily sure he is aware of that pain that has been passed on to me, you know? So yeah, writing these characters, I felt, I mean, it's hard because at the same time, I'm like, I just have to write the story. And so, but I wrote most of myself, I think, into the character of Amelia. And I'm really thankful um, that I had really, really awesome artists who like really connected with the piece in a way that I did not expect. As an actor myself, I'm like, oh yeah, there's always a certain amount of distance between me and the character I'm playing, but these actors just like really wholeheartedly, like chest open, walked into these characters and then infused it with themselves. So yeah, I guess now I feel gratitude, where before we went into rehearsals I felt a lot of just pain,
Yeah,
essentially.
in some ways it is the arc of a healing story.
Hmm.
That trying to give voice to pain
Hmm.
is really, really a lot of work, and it's a lot of times where people get stuck
Yeah.
and sort of in a kind of loop. But what you described as kind of okay, and sort of bringing it to me and to your Salvadoran family, and sort of getting the feedback that started to kind of open something up, and then it lands in um, in the bodies of these actors and your sound crew, and your whole production team, and you get to watch it with a little bit of perspective. That's a
Hmm.
healing story, having a little bit of perspective.
And I think that's something that has always astonished me about this story, is that everybody who cares for it besides me. Like Wiley, my director, Megan, our sound designer, Kobe, our composer, who we love, and just, I mean, also with Shakes too, right? The people who listen to it before it even comes out. I send it to a couple people at Shakes because we send it to a couple people at Shakes because we're like, hey, can you listen to this to make sure that everything sounds clear? And there's just so much like love and caring around this play, in a way that like, and even in the rehearsal space, right? Like an actor would have a really emotional response and we would all just sit there. Like, it's okay to be feeling things, I think. And as actors, we've been told for so long as artists to leave our baggage at the door and to compartmentalize so we can show up to work and like get down to, the brass tacks of it all. But part of me is like, no, like I can't just leave the pandemic at the door. I can't just leave this trauma at the door anymore, right? Like, it's a part of who I am. It literally embedded in my cellular DNA, this trauma.
Mhm.
And I think that what's nice is that there has been this space around this show to be incredibly human around it and to be incredibly vulnerable around this play. And even just having it just in our ears, right? Like, we experience it as individuals. We're not going and sitting in a theater and with a bunch of other people. It's like, it's right here. Like, it's personal. It's about you.
Yeah, and on the topic of staying safe and sort of where people get caught sometimes is they can get sometimes activated by this stuff and get isolated.
Mm.
And so there's a beautiful experience of listening. I've had it. Um, and we want to make sure that people know that even if they're listening by themselves, they're
Mm-hmm.
not alone. Because
Yes.
that is a huge message.
Mm-hmm.
That is a huge message. You are not alone.
Mm-hmm.
Our humanity is documented in this play, but your reactions are your reactions and you don't have to suffer alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Belonging is what protects us,
Yeah.
and finding belonging in um, newly uh, recontextualized classical works, I think it's almost essential for our healthy survival.
Well, and I think about that idea of like, I used to go to the, used to, as in like, I can't go to the theater now. Like, I'll still go to the theater when we can again. Or I'm going in a very different way, obviously, right now. But I was like, I used to go to the theater because I could experience something with a group of other people. And I think about, I saw this production of Indecent at OSF last year, written by Paula Vogel. And and I was just in this room of all of these strangers that I didn't know, and I had an incredibly cathartic response because another play about trauma and survivorship. You've read it,
Mhm.
and I was just sitting there sobbing, hysterically sobbing, like you could hear my sobs in the theater, but there was 5 other people crying, and I think that that's crying with me, maybe not like in the same row or in the same space, but there was that energy, that release that happened in the room. And I do agree, I was like, that isn't necessarily happening when you listen to this play because it's just you. um and I think that you know a a great way for people to kind of is to, I'm like, yes, please talk about it, like message me, talk, like I'm like, talk to me about it, message me about it, post, but like not because of the publicity for it, but I'm just like, I lived it, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, I lived this play and I'm excited and I want to engage with how you specifically, the listener, are feeling about it. um
I think it's also really helpful just to imagine other people. Okay, my dog's having a moment. Hold on a second. Oh my goodness.
no worries, that's part of it.
Yeah, there's a snowball fight outside. Um, um, to imagine that there are, it's not hard to imagine. I mean, you've had over 2,000 views.
Hmm.
That there are
I
people
think I think
listening, something like that.
we don't know actually.
Lots of, well, anything a godmother says, imagined, said from the heart of pride, uh,
Yes.
could be 2 million for all I know.
Yeah, exactly. Thank
Uh,
you.
but to know others are listening and others are probably having similar reactions.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Or, or they might not. Like, that's what it's been kind of intense about this is I'm like, I'm going to write a story and I'm going to put it out into the world. People could love it. It's not for everybody too. You know what I mean? I was like, I have to just like let let that go. Be like, okay, you like however you respond to it, that's your authentic response. And I'll be here if you want to talk about it, if you want to message me about it. And
Well,
I try to respond to as many as I can.
yeah, I mean that's it right there. That's what's important about this is that it's offering another conversation.
Hmm.
How we destigmatize mental health conditions. Um, and we already know that maybe Rena's been dealing with something. She may have had a suicide attempt. She
Hmm.
certainly kind of thinks about it already. Um, how we destigmatize that is offering up ways to have conversation, to
Right.
make meaning, and to to talk about shifting the narrative.
Yeah.
What else can you do besides, you know the things that are damaging to your potential as a human? What else can you do to
Yeah.
guide yourself through this? I
Yeah.
think I think that's right. It's not for us to prescribe. Just because there are these themes
Hmm.
and you have this experience in your life
Hmm.
doesn't mean this is going to activate that experience for you
Yeah.
in a way that you can't handle.
Yeah.
I,
Well,
I
oh,
think
sorry.
I think that's what theaters can do.
Hmm. Hmm. Just because I'm aware of the time, is there anything else that you want people to know or people to think about or um, anything else?
No, I think that's about it for now. I think the messaging is really clear and really safe, and and there are parts of this show that are going to make people think hard about what happens when the psychological pain of trauma is so intense that the only thing people can think of doing is ending their life.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
I think that's what I want to really make sure that there is a link between those all of those things,
Hmm.
um, and to reflect and pay attention to what it what it activates in you,
Hmm.
and to know where your limit is, and to know that there are ways of having other options.
Hmm. Yeah. And there's an awesome list of resources. If you go to seattleshakespeare.org/House of Sueños, there's an awesome list of resources at the bottom of the page for folks in terms of the Trevor Project, the suicide prevention text line. We list them all kind of all the way at the bottom of the page. And there's also some really awesome merch too that's of interest of you. I've been actually journaling a lot, which is kind of fun throughout this whole time. And I think that's one of the things too. I know that we're supposed to be wrapping up, but that last year when I look at where I was about 3 months before I started writing this version of House of Sueños, I started to use a lot of imagery of the ocean in my writing. And I think it was also like the most depressed I have ever been in my life was last year. And it's just interesting how like you have these things that you can kind of go back to and pull back to and just look at and be like, whoa, that was in my writing before I knew it was in my writing, or I felt like that before I knew I felt like that, and then it found its way into my story and into my play. So so yeah. Anyways, there are tons of resources at seattleshakespeare.org. There's and I am totally, if anyone wants to ever talk about House of Sueños, I love to talk about it. And Marlene, thank you so much.
What a
Thank
total
you.
pleasure, and I'm here if you need me as always,
Yes.
um, and just happy to support any of these conversations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thank you so much.
Welcome.